7 Days of Zen, How I Transformed My Work Life. I did everything differently at work, and something unbelievable happened. Imagine waking up every day buried under impossible deadlines, bosses screaming, colleagues competing like wolves, and you feeling like an exhausted zombie, running in circles without seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. That was me, stressed, anxious, exploding over every little thing. Until I decided to test Buddhist practices for 7 days. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a desperate cry for change. And what happened? A transformation that left me speechless, touched my soul, and changed my life forever. I was at rock bottom. You know that feeling of living on autopilot, reacting to everything like a wounded animal? That was me. 3 months of insomnia, fights at home, zero patience for anything. My girlfriend said I had become someone else, and not in a good way. That's when I stumbled upon a video of a Zen nun talking about how Buddhism isn't about distant gods, but about awakening the mind here and now. Something clicked. I thought, what's the harm in trying for a week? Day 1 started at 6 in the morning. I sat on my bedroom floor, legs crossed, eyes closed. 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation, just breathing, observing thoughts like passing clouds. It seemed silly, but something strange happened. My mind, which was usually a hurricane of worries, went quiet. Not completely, but calmer. As if someone had turned down the volume of the internal chaos. At work, instead of checking my phone every 2 minutes, I paused before every email. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, then replied. A meeting that would usually make me freak out became something else. I actually listened instead of just waiting for my turn to speak. The boss was stressed as usual, but instead of absorbing his negative energy, I created a bubble of calm around me. Colleagues noticed. "You're different today," said Marina from accounting. I was surprised myself. The afternoon brought the first real test. A dissatisfied client, screaming on the phone about a delay that wasn't even our fault. Normally, I would scream back or take it out on someone later. But I remembered the first Buddhist precept, not causing suffering. I breathed, spoke calmly, and acknowledged his frustration without getting defensive. Within 5 minutes, he was apologizing. I was shocked. Did this thing actually work? Day 2 went deeper. I woke up and, before meditating, I mentally recited, "May all beings be happy, may all be free from suffering." It felt forced at first, but something moved in my chest. A strange sense of connection, as if I were part of something bigger. In the crowded subway, instead of cursing everyone mentally, I practiced compassion. I looked at each person and thought, this person also suffers, they also want to be happy. A guy stepped on my foot. And instead of exploding, I smiled and said, "No problem." He was so surprised he smiled back. At work, I applied mindfulness to every task. Instead of doing 3 things at once poorly, I focused on one at a time. The result? I finished everything faster and with better quality. It was as if my brain had switched from scatter mode to laser mode. The anxiety that always accompanied my days was decreasing. It didn't disappear, but it became manageable. Day 3 brought a painful revelation. During morning meditation, instead of running away from bad thoughts, I observed them without judgment. I realized something terrifying. 90% of my worries were about things that would never happen. I lived in an imaginary future full of catastrophes. My mind was a suffering factory working 24 hours a day. I cried there, sitting on the floor. Not from sadness, but from relief. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing it was just a dream. At the office, I tested something radical. Instead of complaining about everything with colleagues, our favorite sport, I practiced gratitude. I mentally gave thanks for having a job, health, and a roof over my head. It seems obvious, but I had never truly done it. The change was instant. The day felt lighter, the people around me seemed less annoying. It was as if I had swapped dark sunglasses for clear lenses. Day 4 was the turning point. I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. Meditation flowed naturally, without effort. At work, I faced the tensest situation of the week, a presentation to the board about a delayed project. Normally, I would be nervous, stutter, and break into a cold sweat. But something had changed. Before entering the room, I took a deep breath and visualized everyone there as human beings with fears and hopes, not as predators. I spoke calmly, took responsibility without crucifying myself, and proposed solutions instead of excuses. At the end, the director said it was one of the best presentations he had ever seen. I could hardly believe it. Compassion was becoming automatic. When the receptionist was rude to me, instead of snapping back, I thought, what a hard day she must be having. I smiled genuinely and asked if she was okay. She broke down, talking about problems at home. We talked for 5 minutes, she thanked me and said I had saved her day. I realized something profound: when we stop being the center of the universe opens up to us. On the 5th day, the transformation was accelerating. Morning meditation revealed something beautiful: the interconnection of everything. The air I breathed had been breathed by millions of people before me. The food on my plate got there through the work of hundreds of hands. I wasn't an isolated island, but part of a gigantic web of life. This realization filled me with humility and gratitude. At work, I practiced generosity without expecting anything in return. I helped a colleague with a project that wasn't my responsibility. I shared my snack with someone who forgot theirs. I genuinely praised the work of people I would normally criticize. The office energy shifted. People started being kinder to me, more collaborative. It was as if I had thrown a stone into a lake and the ripples of kindness spread in circles. The anxiety that had followed me for months was almost gone. Not because the problems had disappeared, but because my relationship with them changed. Instead of fighting difficulties like a desperate warrior, I learned to dance with them like a surfer on the waves. The problems were still there, but I was no longer their slave. Day 6 arrived with a sense of peace I didn't remember feeling since I was a child. Meditation was deep, almost transcendental. For a few minutes, the I disappeared. There was no longer a separation between observer and observed, just pure consciousness. When I came back, I was crying with emotion. It was as if I had touched something sacred inside me. At the office, I tested radical forgiveness. I called a client who had treated me poorly the week before and apologized for the misunderstandings, taking my share of the blame without judging him. He was so surprised that he also apologized. We ended the conversation laughing, and he closed an even larger contract. I mentally forgave everyone who had hurt me, including myself. The weight I had carried on my shoulders for years simply evaporated. Day 7 was magical. I woke up with a sense of completeness I had never experienced. Meditation was like meeting a dear friend. For 40 minutes, there was no separation between me and the present moment. I was home, finally home inside my own skin. At work, something extraordinary happened. The boss, who was usually a hurricane of stress, called me into his office. I expected a lecture, but he said, "I don't know what you've done this past week, but keep doing it." You're radiating an energy that's contagious. The team's mood has improved, productivity is up, even I am calmer. He offered me a promotion on the spot. I was speechless. But the greatest transformation wasn't external. It was internal. For the first time in years, I liked who I was becoming. Chronic anger had turned into understanding. Anxiety became presence. Judgment became acceptance. I was no longer a prisoner of my thoughts and emotions. I had become the compassionate observer of my own experience. The practice of mindfulness taught me that happiness doesn't come from external circumstances, but from how we relate to what is happening right now. Buddhism wasn't a distant religion, but a practical technology for the mind. In 7 days, I discovered tools that worked better than years of therapy. The statistics make sense now. Millions of people are turning to these practices because they actually work. Meditation apps report tens of millions of users because people are desperate for inner peace in an increasingly chaotic world. I had joined this silent revolution of people who chose to wake up. But the most beautiful thing was realizing that this transformation wasn't about me. It was about how I could contribute to reducing suffering in the world. Every moment of presence, every act of compassion, every kind word created waves of positivity that touched other lives. I had become a healing agent in a wounded world. The week ended, but the journey was just beginning. These practices were no longer an experiment, but a lifestyle. I continued meditating every morning, practicing compassion during the day, and cultivating gratitude before bed. My life didn't become perfect, problems kept appearing, but my ability to deal with them was completely transformed. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes this possibility of transformation. You don't need to become a monk or abandon your life. Just start with 10 minutes of meditation a day, practice kindness in small interactions, and observe your thoughts without fully identifying with them. These practices are like seeds, planted with sincerity, they grow naturally. The journey beyond, mastering the 21-day path. What moves me most is knowing that you can start right now. Close your eyes, take 3 deep breaths, and feel life pulsing inside you. This is the doorway to a more conscious, compassionate, and full existence. 7 days might seem like a short time, but it's enough to plant seeds that will bloom for the rest of your life. I changed everything in my work and life by following these ancient principles adapted for the modern world. You can too. Transformation is within reach of anyone willing to look inward with courage and kindness. Awakening isn't a privilege for a few enlightened ones, it is the birthright of every human being. Now I want to hear from you. Which part touched your heart the most? Tell me in the comments if you've already tried mindfulness or if you plan to start after this video. Your experience might inspire others who are going through exactly what I went through. If this content made a difference in your life, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more journeys of personal transformation. Together, we can create a wave of awakening and compassion that goes far beyond the screen. A big hug, and until the next transformation. Facing the obstacles. But before you rush off to implement all of this, let me tell you about the obstacles you will face, because they will show up, you can be sure of that. In the first few days, your mind will do everything to convince you that this is a waste of time. It will say, you have more important things to do, this is hippie stuff, or, you weren't born for this. Do you recognize those voices? I heard every single one of them. On the 3rd day of my transformation, I remember meditating when my boss called me about an emergency project. My first reaction was to jump off the cushion and run. But then I took a deep breath and thought, what if I answer this call with total presence instead of anxiety? It was a turning point. I solved the problem in 5 minutes, when normally it would have taken an hour of stress. The first obstacle is internal resistance. Your conditioned mind will fight any change because it was programmed to keep you in your comfort zone, even if that zone is one of suffering. It's like being a bird that spent its whole life in a cage, and suddenly someone opens the door. Your first impulse isn't to fly, it's to stay where you've always been. The second obstacle is impatience. We live in the era of instant results, immediate likes, and two-click gratification. Buddhist practices work at a different pace, the rhythm of nature, of organic growth. It's like planting a tree, you don't see the result on the first day. But if you water it consistently, in a few weeks, you'll notice the first sprouts. The third obstacle is the people around you. Not everyone will understand your journey of awakening. Some will think it's weird, others will try to discourage you, and some might even feel threatened by your transformation. When I started meditating in the office during lunch, my colleagues made jokes, "There goes the monk," or "Have you reached nirvana yet?" Eventually, the silence of my transformation spoke louder than their jokes, and some even asked me to teach them. Your 21-day transformation roadmap. 7 days are just the beginning. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to form new connections, needs at least 3 weeks to create new patterns. Here is your schedule. Week 1, the foundation. Every day, upon waking and before touching your phone, sit on your bed and breathe consciously for 5 minutes. Count your breaths from 1 to 10 and restart. When your mind wanders, and it will, simply return to the breath without judging yourself. At night, list 3 things you are grateful for. Week 2, the expansion. Increase your morning meditation to 10 minutes and add a midday practice. During lunch, eat at least the first 3 minutes in total silence, paying attention to flavors and textures. Start observing your automatic thoughts. When you catch yourself judging or complaining, just note it. "Ah, I am judging." No guilt, just awareness. Week 3, the integration. Move your formal meditation to 15 minutes, but the key is bringing mindfulness to every activity. Brush your teeth with total presence, feel the shower water on your skin, and truly listen when someone speaks. Practice active compassion, give one sincere compliment a day and forgive a small offense. The reality of awareness. One thing nobody tells you about awakening is that you'll start seeing things that previously went unnoticed. You'll see how people live on autopilot and notice the subtle violence in everyday communication. This can be uncomfortable at first, like cleaning your glasses after a long time. Suddenly everything is sharper, including things you'd rather not see. But this clarity is a gift. It gives you the power of real choice for the first time in your life. The Buddha taught something revolutionary that modern science is confirming. Happiness does not depend on external conditions, but on the quality of our mind. We have a hedonic treadmill, a tendency to return to an emotional baseline regardless of what we win or lose. Buddhist practices allow us to raise that baseline. The untrained mind is like a drunken monkey swinging from branch to branch. But through meditation, you develop the muscle of attention. You stop being a hostage to circumstances and start becoming a co-creator of your reality. Meditation isn't an escape from reality, it's a deeper dive into it. You become more present, more attentive, and more connected. When you multiply these moments of presence, your life gains a completely different quality. Part 3, the art of responding and the power of impermanence. What Buddhism offers is a different way to relate to suffering. Instead of resisting, denying, or being dominated by it, you learn to observe it with curiosity and compassion. You understand that pain is inevitable, but suffering, which is our resistance to pain, is optional. Let me give you a concrete example. A few months after I started practicing, I received news that, in other circumstances, would have left me devastated. A project I had invested a lot of time and energy into was cancelled. My first reaction was exactly what you'd expect: frustration, anger, and disappointment. But something interesting happened. Instead of fully identifying with those emotions, I managed to observe them arising and unfolding. It was like watching a storm from a safe window. The emotions were there, they were real and valid, but they didn't dominate me. This allowed me to respond instead of react. I was able to process the situation clearly, extract the lessons, make the necessary adjustments, and move on without carrying resentment or bitterness. What could have been a source of prolonged suffering simply became a challenging experience that passed. This ability to respond rather than react is perhaps the most valuable skill I've developed. And it applies to everything, from a traffic jam to family conflicts, from professional frustrations to existential crises. When you don't react automatically to external stimuli, you gain a precious space between what happens and your response. In that space lies your freedom. In that space, you can consciously choose how you want to respond, based on your values and goals, not on emotional impulses. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said something that aligns perfectly with this perspective. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Buddhism offers practical tools to expand that space and use that power of choice more wisely. And one of those tools is a deep understanding of impermanence. Everything changes. Always. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's the most basic reality of existence. Your body is changing every second. Your thoughts are in constant flux. Your emotions arise and pass like waves in the ocean. The situations that seem permanent are temporary. When you internalize this truth, it becomes a source of great relief. That anxiety that feels like it will last forever. It will pass. That difficult period that seems endless. It will also pass. That pain that feels unbearable. It, too, is impermanent. But impermanence cuts both ways. Those moments of intense joy. They will also pass. That good phase of life. It won't last forever. This might sound depressing, but it's actually liberating. When you accept impermanence, you stop clinging desperately to the good times and stop resisting the difficult ones so fiercely. You learn to surf the waves of life instead of being dragged down by them. Part 4: Beginner's Mind and the Wisdom of Failure. This perspective completely changed my relationship with success and failure. Before, successes made me euphoric and failures devastated me. Now, I celebrate successes without getting attached to them, and I face failures without identifying with them. Both are temporary, both have something to teach. This shift also transformed my relationship with the future. Before, I lived in constant anxiety about what might happen. I planned obsessively, trying to control uncontrollable variables, creating catastrophic scenarios in my head. Now I understand that the future is fundamentally uncertain, and that's a good thing. Uncertainty isn't a bug in life, it's a feature. It's what makes change, growth, and positive surprises possible. The Stoics had a similar concept called amor fati, the love of fate. The idea is to not only accept what happens but to embrace it completely, finding value and meaning even in the most difficult experiences. Buddhism goes further, it not only embraces what happens but cultivates an attitude of gratitude for everything, including the challenges. The practice of gratitude, then, stops being just a motivational exercise and becomes a tool for profound transformation. I remember a particularly hard time at work. A project I had led for months was cancelled at the last minute. But I asked myself, what can this teach me? I learned about resilience, about detaching from the result, and about valuing the process as much as the final product. Most importantly, I realized my identity didn't depend on that project's success. I was still the same person, with the same value. Buddhism calls this, beginner's mind, the ability to approach every situation with curiosity and openness, as if for the first time. It's the opposite of the expert mind that already knows how things are and therefore stops learning. This approach changed my relationship with mistakes. Before, I saw them as evidence of my inadequacy. Now, I see them as valuable data, feedback from the universe on where I can improve. Failures became my most honest teachers. They don't lie, they don't spare me, they don't leave me in my comfort zone. They point out exactly where my limitations are and invite me to grow. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment, not to things themselves, but to our expectations of how things should be. When we let go of these rigid expectations, suffering naturally diminishes. This isn't the same as having no goals. I still prefer success over failure. The difference is that I don't turn those preferences into absolute demands. This mindset deeply affected my relationships. I stopped trying to control how people behaved or reacted. I focused only on my part, how I communicated, how I responded, how I chose to show up. The result was liberating. Relationships became more authentic because I stopped playing roles to get approval. Conflict decreased because I stopped taking others' reactions as personal attacks. I discovered that when you stop trying to impress others, you naturally become more impressive. When you stop seeking external validation, you develop an internal confidence that is far more attractive than any facade.